right, Andy. One of the things you're most famous for is the run at the 2006 World Series 50K horse. All right, after you started with a tough table, you had the final table with Phil Ivey, Doyle Brunson, just to name a few, but then you ended up heads up with Chip Reese for over 7 hours, right?
Right. I think it was like 8 or 9 hours, actually.
Yeah. Some people consider that to be one of the greatest heads-up matches of all time, you know? What do you feel?
Well, at the time, I mean, I was just happy to be at that final table. I mean, it was a dream of mine to be able to play with people like Doyle Brunson and Chip Reese. I mean, those were my heroes when I first started playing poker.
Sure.
And to actually make a final table with them, and then to do well enough at the final table, get the right hands in the right spot to make it heads up with Chip Reese. Right. When I knocked out Phil Ivey, I was, it was a big relief. Of course, you get Phil Ivey out of the tournament, but then I realized, I looked at our chip stacks, I looked at the blinds, and I realized that this could be a long battle. It could take you a couple of hours. And then it ended up going all night and into the morning. Right. And, it took a long time, and it was a seesaw battle. I kept grinding him down, and then he'd win a big pot and double up, and, I did that 4 times. And the last one, I was crippled after that and couldn't recover.
Well, what were the emotions after?
Well, of course, at first you're really disappointed, and then, once they hand you the check and you realize that you just won, a 1 with 6 zeros after it.
Then it's all right.
It makes some of the pain go away.
Right. Even though it wasn't a win, though, where does it rank in your career?
Oh, it definitely ranks up there, bigger than any of my tournament wins. I've won a few tournaments. The biggest tournament prize that I've won for first is Full Tilt Poker had the Full Tilt Poker Pro-Am Equalizer that was on TV a couple of years ago. Yeah. The same year that I finished second to Chip Reese, and that was $500,000. But that was an invitational event, and there was only 36 players. Right. But I still won more money finishing second to Chip Reese in that tournament, so that was my biggest cash anyway to date.
Right. Does Chip's passing change at all the way you look back on it?
Well, I wish I had parlayed that experience and gotten to know Chip a lot more than I did. I mean, we did talk a little bit afterwards, but, I just kind of assumed, okay, Chip will be there, and we'll have plenty of time to, talk and reminisce about that, like, years down the road. And, looking back on it, you start to realize, hey, life can be short sometimes, and you have to go and seize the moment and not miss opportunities with people when you have the chance.
Right, of course. All right, Andy. Like we do everybody else on the show, we have to talk about life before poker. Yeah. You grew up in Connecticut?
I grew up in Orange, Connecticut, a small town near New Haven.
What kind of kid were you?
I was a pretty nerdy kid, I think. I have to admit. Well, when I was really young, I was pretty good at sports, I think, for my age, when I was like 5, 6 and growing up. And then, I went to a Jewish day school, and that kind of took a lot out of me. Although I think I was cool for my class. Yeah. But when I went to when I went to high school after that, I was a little bit awkward, and so I spent a lot of time. Well, I probably didn't work too hard, but I was always very mathematically inclined, and I skipped grades in math and took all the advanced placement science courses, and got into MIT early and went to MIT in the Boston area.
So was it weird being like the young kid in the class since you were so many years younger than most
of the people? I was only about like 2 years younger than most of the people in the class, and I was kind of just used to it by then. It was wasn't that bad, and I was still at the top of the class. So
right. All right. So you started playing poker in casinos sometime after college. And one of your early wins was at my favorite place in the world, $100 tournament in Foxwoods. You said in an interview that was the first time you'd ever played No Limit Hold'em. How do you explain the success?
Well, it wasn't the first time I had played, actually. I did play No Limit. No, it's the first time I played for real. I did play. There was this old computer game, the World Series of Poker Adventure. I think it was by Max Software back in the old PCs, and they had really terrible graphics. 640 by 480 and stuff, and I played on that, and I think I ended up eventually able to win that. But then I played this $100 buy-in event, which for me was the biggest tournament I'd ever played at Foxwoods. That was, pretty big buy-in. Most of the time was these $35 weekly events. And, I, somehow like made it to the final table, and there was a couple of pros there, and then eventually like got my money in at the right time and doubled up, and the last hand I won with Jack High.
Did you feel like you knew what you were doing at all at that time?
I probably thought I knew more than I did.
Yeah.
But I did know a few things that a lot of people didn't really know that very well about how the hands change values when you get really short stacked. Yeah. But I hadn't done a lot of the research that I did later on with my computer programming experience. I wrote some programs to actually figure out some optimal strategies for when you get short stacked in a no limit tournament.
Yeah, I've heard you talk about that before. Yeah. Tell me about rec.gambling.poker.
Well, rec.gambling.poker is one of the old internet newsgroup sites. Before you had the World Wide Web, before you had web browsers.
Yeah, I didn't know what this was.
There were people chatting about gambling or about any topic on something called the Usenet. Okay. And these messages would get forwarded from server to server all around the internet, and you could post on there. And Chris Ferguson got into poker a lot that way. Yeah. And several other people, Bill Chen, a lot of those kind of people. And actually Howard Lederer and Daniel Negreanu ended up posting on those news groups later on, a couple years after I got involved on it. But I had gotten involved on it before actually there was a rec.gambling.poker. It was just rec.gambling, and they threw it all together because there weren't that many people on it. And I had internet access early because from my job I was working for a computer company that's now out of business, digital equipment company outside of Boston. And so I had good computer access, so I would go in there. If I happened to get in there before noon, I think I would spend all the first couple of hours
at work.
At work, reading, getting up to date on all the messages, and then replying, and then doing some of my own poker analysis and other things.
Do you think it was a good learning tool back then?
It was definitely a great learning tool. I mean, if you want to learn poker, the best way to do it is to find other poker players who want to learn too, and to work with each other and help you improve your game. And you see that with a lot of the young kids here that are really doing well. They're not doing that in isolation. They didn't just play on the internet and not talk to anybody and figure all this stuff out on their own. They're all talking to each other too. And you now have a lot of different new chat rooms on the internet that you can go and talk to people about poker. And there's a lot more opportunities now. Whereas back then we didn't have online poker. Nope. There was an email tournament that once a year. It took a long time, and they modeled it after the World Series of Poker, but it would take about 4 to 6 months.
Wow. That's a long time. We have to bring this up for the people who don't already know. You got to briefly describe your involvement with MIT Blackjack team.
Right. So I went to MIT, and while I was there, as a student, there was this rumor that there was this MIT Blackjack team. It was kind of like this secret thing, and people knew that there's something like that, but didn't really know what was going on. And then after I graduated, I met somebody from the MIT Blackjack team at a home poker game, and I just won this tournament at Foxwoods, and he thought that was pretty cool, and it might have qualified me to help him out, and he was going to start a poker team, and he asked me if I would help teach MIT students or graduates, 21, 22-year-olds, how to play low-limit Texas Hold'em and 7-card stud. And we would go down. The plan was to go down and play at Foxwoods and teach them how to play, and they could, make some money, right, and hopefully go up a level. But I had figured out how to beat this casino game called Hickok 6-card poker at Foxwoods that some VP of Foxwoods had invented. And it was actually beatable, and I wrote some computer programs that let my computer run for hours and hours and hours to figure out a strategy. Gave us a 6% edge, which is pretty good for a casino game like blackjack.